Hi, I'm Dai Shizuka. I'm an assistant professor at School of Biological Sciences at UNL. And today I wanted to share a little bit of my experience with storytelling. And so my motivation here is that in science communication, we're often talking about ways to bring science to life. But storytelling is a really great way, I think, to bring life to science, to bring personal perspectives into science, and to communicate science effectively, but also, in the end, improving your science as well if you're a researcher. So um, this concept is really central to the movement or the increase that you might be seeing in the art of storytelling, led by big organizations like the Moth and Story Collider, which puts on live performances and recorded performances of storytelling. The Moth generally and Story Collider is often with scientists. Key thing is that there are no notes and that they're personal stories, right? And they're increasingly becoming popular at scientific conferences as well. And so my experience comes from one of these events, the American Ornithological Society meeting in 2019, where I participated in one of these storytelling events. So there are a lot of tips on how to tell a story, how to tell a science story. And so these are tips from Story Collider. Don't lecture. This is not science communication in the sense of an explainer of science. You want to have a story that has an arc, and you want a personal story that's about you, that allows people to connect with your experience. You want to use kind of just enough science. Maybe science doesn't seem like the central part of the story, but through your personal experience, it deepens an understanding of science for the general public. You want to try to begin in the middle of the story. You don't have to fixate on a chronological order. You don't have to start from the very beginning. You want to keep it short, right? And very importantly, end at the end. This is my favorite tip. When the story ends, trust your audience. Just stop there. Let them interpret. And that's kind of a scary part for a lot of us in science, and leaving up the interpretation to people. But I think that's one of the essence of storytelling. So what I'm going to do today is tell you about song learning in birds, which is a topic that's central to my research program. And I could give you multi-part lectures on this. I could probably teach a whole course on this. But what I want to do is tell the story, tell the science to you by including my personal experience. That's me in the middle, my experience learning English. Okay. So in the spirit of how these things go, I'm going to turn off my video, and I want you to just kind of focus on nothing but just this image, perhaps close your eyes, and I'm going to deliver my story in a way that I might do it in a live performance. Okay. So my family moved to Houston from Tokyo in the mid-1980s. I was 7 years old, almost 8 years old. This corresponds to the tail end of what we call the sensitive period for language acquisition in humans. So what that means is that I got to learn English the magical way. At first, I didn't understand anything that was going on, and a year or two later, I could speak English the way I'm speaking to you now as a native speaker. I remember moments when I learned specific words like name and zoo. I also remember specific moments when I didn't have the words to explain that I wasn't lying. I just didn't know how to explain myself any better. Despite those memories, I couldn't tell you when I actually acquired English as a language. It's just at one point I didn't have it, and then sometime later I did. My two older brothers who were 5 and 6 years older than me, had a different relationship with English. They eventually became perfectly fluent in English, but they always retained this Japanese accent. And they had trouble with nuances like irony and sarcasm and humor in some instances. And those differences in our language, I think, led me and my brothers to very different lives. You see, my brothers elected to go back to Japan for college, and there eventually they got jobs, they fell in love, started families, and I chose to stay here in the United States and go to college and to grad school, fall in love, start a family here in Nebraska. And it's amazing to me always how different of these few years early in life and the vagaries of the developmental program of our brains can produce such a big difference in the lives within one family. I think about all this a lot now that I have 2 kids of my own, raising them with my American wife in Nebraska. The oldest is nearing the end of his sensitive period for language. And I often fall into this conversation, So, is Justin learning Japanese? Do you talk to him in Japanese? It's really great for him to be bilingual. And I always think, you don't have to tell me about the benefits of being bilingual. I've lived it. But, it's more complicated than that. Life is more complicated. I also think about all this every spring when I start to hear the birds sing. You see, decades of research has shown that songbirds learn their songs through a process a lot like how we learn language. They have a sensitive period for song learning early in their life, although the details of this vary between species. They memorize the sounds they hear from their parents and their neighbors and others during this time of their lives, and it shapes the song that they'll sing for the rest of their lives. And much like our own language, some songbirds have regional dialects that arise through accumulated differences in what we call cultural evolution, right? So they have cultures. Take, for example, the golden-crowned sparrow. It's the bird that you're looking at on the screen there. They're famous among bird watchers for their plaintive, beautiful whistled song with a mnemonic. Oh, dear me. But that happens to be the Alaskan dialect. If you cross the border into Canada, there are 2 other dialects you'll commonly hear. One goes, oh, dear me. And the other goes, oh, dear me. So in 2016, my students and I were studying this bird in the mountains around the town of Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory. This is a mixed dialect population, so you can walk around and hear birds on different territories singing one of 2 dialects. Oh, dear me, and oh, dear me. Each bird sings just one dialect in its life, except this one exceptional bird. This male had a huge territory, unlike any sparrow I've ever met in all the years I've studied this bird. And this particular bird could sing 2 dialects perfectly. He was essentially bilingual. It took us a long time to figure this out because first you have to be able to tell which individual it was. So we had these colored leg bands on all the birds in the population. We could tell them apart. So this male, green metal, we would follow him around. And at one point, he would be singing, oh, dear me, oh, dear me. And then one day, we continued to follow him to the next perch. And suddenly, he changed the song. And he would sing, oh, dear me, oh, dear me. And this is really fascinating to me. So I would spend days following this bird around, writing my field notes, and pondering all the time, where did he grow up? Who did he interact with? How did he become bilingual? And inevitably, my thoughts would wander over to my son, who would have been 3 years old at the time, back home. What's he doing now? And eventually, how will his life, growing up in Nebraska, combined with the vagaries of the developmental program of our brain, how's that going to shape his life? The curious thing about this bird, green metal, is that this bird never found a mate that year. He would roam around his vast territory, singing his extraordinary song on his own. Later in the season, he disappeared from his territory, and we found him on the other side of the mountain for a few days. And then he was nowhere to be seen. But I still hold out hope that he was just searching for that right place to fall in love and start a family and put down his roots. Thanks.